The Johnson family seemed perfect to the outside world. Matthew Johnson, 43 years old, was a successful contractor whose name graced dozens of suburban homes. His wife, Laura, 41 years old, was a balanced homemaker who devoted herself to raising their 17-year-old daughter, Samantha. Together, they represented the perfect American family, or so it seemed. But cracks had been forming beneath the surface for years. Matthew worked long hours to support their lifestyle, leaving Laura lonely and resentful. Samantha found herself torn between two opposing worlds, spending most of her time in books and music. That all changed when Samantha entered high school. On her first day, Samantha found herself captivated by her literature teacher, Mr. Ethan Carter. At 32 years old, Ethan had a knack for getting people involved. He was different from other teachers, he was special. Samantha, who struggled with self-confidence, admired his intelligence and warmth. Ethan quickly noticed Samantha's talent as a writer. He often praised her work, telling her she had a gift. For a teenager like Samantha, encouragement was a special gesture of consideration. She began staying after school to ask him about her assignments, and their conversations moved from literature to life. At a parent-teacher conference in early September, Laura first met Ethan. From the first words Laura said, she was struck by his charisma. From then on, their communication became more frequent, and it wasn't just an interest in Ethan as her child's teacher, it was much more. One day, Laura and Ethan stayed late after a book fair, stacking books in boxes in an empty classroom. Their conversation became personal. "You're amazing, you know that," he said softly, touching her hand as she held out a book to him. "I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time." She didn't pull away when he kissed her. As Ethan and Laura's secret romance began to take shape, he continued to fuel Samantha's fascination. Samantha was unaware of her mother's growing crush. She was too busy writing poems inspired by Ethan's lessons and fantasizing about him in her journal. Samantha, captivated by Ethan's attention, began to interpret it as something deeper. When he touched her shoulder or leaned in to read her work, her heart raced. Ethan reveled in his control. Balancing the two relationships, he felt invincible. Matthew Johnson sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, flipping through a list of potential clients. The rhythmic click of his pen was the only sound in the room until Laura's phone, which she had left on the charger, buzzed against the counter. Curiosity got the better of him, even though he hadn't noticed it before. He glanced at the illuminated screen, and his heart stopped. "I can't stop thinking about you. Tonight was incredible. E." Matthew stared at the message. He knew immediately who E was, Ethan Carter, Samantha's literature teacher. Matthew closed the message and put the phone back where he'd found it, moving carefully and neatly. He needed time to think. Matthew felt as if he had been turned upside down. That night he couldn't sleep at all. Anger boiled beneath the surface, but there was a deeper sadness, the pain of losing Laura's trust. The next morning he watched his wife's actions. She seemed so calm, as if nothing had happened. He didn't act yet, but instead began to watch Laura more closely. As he had lately, she kept her phone in her hands. She would slip out of bed at night, claiming she needed water or couldn't sleep. Matthew knew she was slipping away from him, and each day the wound deepened. 5 days later, Matthew got his chance. Laura left her phone charging in the kitchen while she went outside. Matthew's heart pounded as he picked it up, opening her text history with Ethan. The messages were intimate, describing stolen moments, old flings, and plans for their next meeting. But what really angered Matthew were the messages that mentioned Samantha. In them, Ethan assured Laura that Samantha knew nothing about their affair. As disgusting as the messages were to read, Matthew read everything to use against them. Over the next few days, Matthew barely spoke to either Laura or Samantha. His anger boiled over, and he wanted revenge, not just on Laura, but on Ethan. He wanted the man who had infiltrated his family to pay for everything. Matthew began his revenge quietly. He created an anonymous email account and wrote a message that listed accusations against Ethan, including inappropriate behavior with students. He sent emails to the school principal, the PTA president, and several parents. Then he began leaving anonymous notes in Ethan's car. "You destroyed my family. Now I'm going to destroy you. Your time is up, Ethan. Watch yourself. What happens next is up to you." Matthew pictured Ethan's face as he read the notes. He wanted him to feel paranoid, afraid of being caught. As December approached, Matthew's plan began to bear fruit. Ethan began to receive strange looks from colleagues, parents, and students. When the principal received the message, he suspended him from classes until the truth was known. Ethan's confidence wavered, and Laura noticed the change. "He's just stressed," she told herself. "This will pass." Matthew Johnson had always been a meticulous planner. His job as a contractor had taught him strategic thinking, and now he had applied those skills to a much darker purpose. Destroying Ethan Carter's reputation was just the beginning. Matthew wanted to take his life apart piece by piece, leaving him broken and humiliated. Matthew started with Ethan's finances. He hired a well-known hacker, who he paid a large sum of money to hack into Ethan's bank account, and he succeeded. On the night of December 10th, Ethan's accounts were empty to the last penny. The next morning, Ethan woke up to a barrage of overdraft notifications. He stared at his phone in disbelief, scrolling through a message from his bank. "Your account balance is below $0. Panic set in when Ethan called his bank, only to be told that the transactions had been authorized using his credentials. His hard-earned savings, everything he had relied on, were gone. Ethan's landlord was already confused by the whispers that were swirling around him. Anonymous emails, notes on the landlord's office door, and silent complaints from tenants painted Ethan as a problem. Matthew created a series of fake complaints, forging emails from neighbors accusing Ethan of noise violations, disorderly conduct, and late-night visitors. 2 days later, Ethan received an eviction notice. Due to numerous complaints and concerns, the letter read, "Your lease is terminated immediately." Ethan was left reeling. His apartment had been the only stable part of his life amidst the chaos. Now he had nowhere to go. Matthew's next move was his most personal. Armed with a long-lens camera and a ruthless determination, he began to spy on Ethan and Laura. It didn't take him long to catch them together. On December 15th, Laura and Ethan met at a remote coffee shop on the outskirts of town. They sat in a corner booth, their heads pressed together, whispering and laughing. Matthew captured every moment. The next evening, Ethan and Laura met again, this time in a motel parking lot. Matthew filmed them embracing, their silhouettes sharply defined against the flickering neon sign. Satisfied with his testimony, Matthew returned home and began to assemble the video. He edited the video into a provocative clip, superimposed with the text. "This is your teacher. This is your parent committee chairman. This is what they're hiding." He uploaded the video to several social media platforms, tagging the Fairview Heights community page and the parent chat for Fairview High School. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Laura didn't notice Matthew's actions until her phone exploded with notifications. Messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and fellow PTA members, all asking the same question. "Is this true?" Her face paled as she opened the video. The images of her and Ethan, laughing, holding hands, kissing. As she realized the implications, shame washed over her. Laura had spent years building an image of herself as a devoted wife, mother, and community leader. Now everything was unraveling. That evening, Laura stormed into the living room, her face red with anger and embarrassment. Matthew sat calmly sipping a glass of bourbon. "You did it," she shouted, picking up the phone. "How could you humiliate me like this?" Matthew met her gaze with a cold smile. "How could you humiliate me like that?" he snapped back in an icy voice. "How could you humiliate our daughter, our family? Don't act like you're the victim here, Laura. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, but Matthew felt no sympathy. Ethan was in the worst shape of his life. The video had reached the school administration, and he was immediately summoned for a meeting. Although Ethan tried to deny the accusations, the evidence was damning. His parents demanded his release, and the school had no choice but to terminate his contract. With no job, no savings, and no place to live, Ethan's carefully constructed life fell apart. He slept in his car at night, scrolling through the hateful comments on the video and wondering how it had all gone so wrong. For Laura, the shame was unbearable. She stopped attending PTA meetings and avoided her usual visits to the city. But Samantha was in deep despair, betrayed by two people she loved, her mother and her lover. Blinded by love, Samantha didn't realize that Ethan had betrayed her. She felt betrayed by her mother. Laura felt isolated, her world pressed against the walls of their home. The Johnson home, once a place of routine and stability, had become a battlefield of silence and tension. Samantha had barely spoken to Laura since the scandal broke. She avoided her mother at every turn, her pain and confusion simmering beneath the surface. But a few days later, it all happened. Samantha burst into the bedroom, where Laura sat with a glass of wine, staring blankly at her phone. "You ruined everything," Samantha exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. Laura looked up in fright. "Samantha, I don't have the energy for this right now," she replied defensively. "Get out of my room. You don't have the energy." Samantha snapped, tears streaming down her face. "Do you even care what you did? You destroyed our family. Everyone at school knows. They're laughing at me, Mom." Laura put down her glass and stood up, frustration boiling. "I made a mistake, Samantha. Do you think I regret it?" She started to push her daughter out into the hallway. "A mistake?" Samantha's voice cracked. "You slept with my teacher. You betrayed my dad. You betrayed me." Samantha's foot caught on the edge of the rug and she tripped. She flailed her arms, trying to catch herself, but she was too close to the stairs. Her body tipped over and she fell down the stairs. The sound of her head hitting the wood echoed throughout the house, followed by an eerie silence. Laura's breath caught as she looked down at her daughter's lifeless body, crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. "Samantha," she cried, rushing to her. She knelt beside her, squeezing Samantha's shoulders gently. "Wake up, baby. Please wake up." But Samantha didn't move. Blood pooled under her head, staining the floor. Panic set in as Laura fumbled for her phone, her shaking hands barely navigating the screen. She dialed 911, her voice shaking. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's an emergency, at 1449, Maple Lane. Send for help." She ended the call and threw the phone to the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably. She couldn't stay. Not here. Not when Matthew was coming home. Without thinking twice, Laura grabbed the car keys from the kitchen counter and headed out the door. Her legs felt like lead as she climbed into the driver's seat, her vision blurred with tears. She started the car and sped away, her mind racing. It was only then that she began to realize what had happened. Her daughter was dead. Her life was in ruins. And she had just fled the scene like a coward. She didn't know where to go, but her instincts led her to the only person who could help, Ethan Carter. He was tired of sleeping in his car, so now he was in an old garage behind an abandoned house on the edge of town. Laura pulled onto the dirt road, hearing the crunch of gravel under her tires. Her headlights illuminated the sagging roof of the detached garage, the paint peeling in long streaks. She got out of the car, her legs unsteady, and hobbled toward the garage door. Her fists pounded on the rusty metal door. "Ethan. Are you here?" "It's me." There was no answer for a moment. Then the door creaked open and Ethan peered out, his pale face shadowed by the dim light bulb hanging inside. Laura, he whispered, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. What the hell are you doing here? Laura pushed inside, her words coming out in wild bursts. Samantha, she fell, she's dead. I didn't mean to push her. It was an accident. I called 911, but I panicked, I couldn't stay there. Ethan froze, his face gone. He scanned the cluttered garage as if the answer to this nightmare lay hidden among the dusty shelves and tools. Oh, God, Laura. Do you even realize what you've done? I didn't know what else to do. Laura cried, falling onto an old stool by the workbench. Her whole body was shaking. Ethan closed the garage door and locked it, moving quickly and panicked. This is too bad. You're the last person seen with her, Laura. You can't just run away and think it's going to go away. Laura buried her face in her hands, muffling her sobs. I don't know what to do, Ethan. I don't know what to do. Ethan paced the small garage, kicking an old toolbox in frustration. The sound echoed in the confined space. You made yourself look guilty by running away. If the police find out you were there and left, they'll assume the worst. He stopped pacing, looking at Laura with a mixture of fear and despair. We need to think. They're going to come looking for you. But first you need to calm down. Laura looked at him, her tear-stained face filled with hopelessness. What do we do? Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumped. We're staying out of sight for now. If the police don't find out you're here, we have time to figure out our next move. He gestured to the old bed against the wall. You can stay here for the night. But if anyone finds us together, it's over for both of us. Laura nodded weakly, curled up on the bed. Ethan watched her for a long moment, then turned back to the door, straining his ears for sirens or approaching footsteps. Matthew pulled into the driveway to a mass of flashing lights and chaos. Ambulances and patrol cars lined up outside his house, their sirens silent but their lights pulsing in a terrifying rhythm. Neighbors huddled together, whispering behind their hands, their faces pale with shock. He got out of the car, his face a look of confusion. What's going on? He called out in a strained voice. The paramedic at the front door looked at him solemnly but said nothing. An officer approached him, blocking his way into the house. Sir, are you Matthew Johnson? Yes, he said, his voice trembling. What happened? Where's my family? The officer hesitated, glancing at the door. I think it's best if you come inside. Matthew's stomach churned as he stepped through the door. The living room was eerily quiet, but the air was thick with tension. His eyes scanned the room, the overturned furniture, the flickering medical equipment, and then he saw the stretcher by the stairs. The bed sheet covering the body was stained with blood. His heart stopped. Samantha, he whispered, bending his knees. No, no, no. This isn't real. This can't be real. The officer put his hand on Matthew's shoulder. Sir, I'm sorry. Your daughter, she didn't make it. Matthew's breathing was short. He stumbled back, his world spinning. How? What happened? The officer waved to another detective, who came over with a sealed evidence bag. Inside was Laura's smartphone. They found this near Samantha, the detective said softly. The last call was to 911. Matthew snatched the bag from the officer, looking at the phone. The detective played the recording, and Laura's voice filled the room. There's been an accident, at 1449, Maple Lane. Send for help. The call ended abruptly. Your wife was here, the officer continued, his voice calm but firm. She called 911, but she was gone before we got there. We're still trying to find her. Matthew's mind was racing to pick up the pieces. His gaze fell to the stairs, where Samantha's blood was still on the floor. He knew his wife was distant, secretive, but this? His mind screamed against understanding, but the evidence was undeniable. Laura was there. She had left Samantha to die. No, he roared, clutching the receiver. Tears streamed down his face as despair overcame him. He fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. She's my daughter. She was just a child. How could she? How could Laura? His words dissolved into broken sobs. In a dimly lit garage on the other side of town, Ethan and Laura were hastily packing their things. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of motor oil and Laura's growing panic. Boxes, bags, and documents were scattered across the floor as they prepared to flee. Laura stood by the workbench, clutching a framed photograph of Samantha. She stared at it, her hands shaking. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she fell. "It was an accident." Ethan turned to her, his expression stern. "Accident or not, Laura, they're going to blame you. You know that. We don't have time to feel guilty right now." Her tears glistened in the dim light of the garage. "I called 911. I tried to save her." Ethan crossed the room, grabbing her arms. "But you left, Laura. And now they'll think you're guilty. If we don't get out of here, they'll arrest you, and your life will be over." She nodded weakly, putting the photo in her bag. "Do you think Matthew knows? Do you think he hates me?" Ethan pressed his lips into a thin line. "He probably already knows. But his feelings don't matter. If we stay here, we'll both be killed. Focus. You think we'll be safe in Mexico?" "That's our best shot," Ethan replied. "We'll stick to the small towns, keep our heads down. It's not ideal, but it's better than prison." Laura hesitated, her gaze darting to the garage door. "I keep thinking about Samantha. Her voice, her face. I'll never see her again." Ethan grabbed the car keys. "Laura, if you want to survive, you need to let her go. Right now." Laura followed him to the car, moving like a robot. She was completely destroyed. Despite warnings across the state and in the news that described her as a fugitive, no one could locate her. She disappeared into the shadows, leaving Matthew and the authorities desperate for answers. But Matthew, seething with anger and consumed by a desire for revenge, would not let her escape justice. He replayed the events in his mind, a spiral of betrayal, tragedy, and cowardice. The only place Laura could run was to Ethan. Matthew shared his theory with the detectives. Despite his initial reluctance, the police began to follow Ethan Carter's last known connections. They soon intercepted a ping from Ethan's recording phone and located him south of the border road. A team was quickly mobilized. Matthew, unable to stand by, insisted on assisting the investigation. The convoy sped along deserted roads, its haste punctuated by flashing lights and sirens. Matthew gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck, following the unmarked police cars. His heart pounded with anticipation. Every mile brought him closer to the calculation he had been obsessed with for days. Ahead, Ethan and Laura sped toward the border in Ethan's battered sedan. The glow of police lights in the distance alerted them to the pursuit. Ethan cursed under his breath as he jerked the steering wheel to pull off the main road. The car pulled into the edge of the woods, kicking up dust and leaves as it screeched to a halt. "Go away. Now!" Ethan barked, grabbing the bag from the back seat. Laura hesitated, her breathing shallow and uneven. "Ethan, we can't run any further. It's over." "Move," he snapped, pulling her out of the car. Together they fled into the dense forest, branches scraping against their skin as they stumbled through the undergrowth. The clatter of their feet on the ground was matched only by the furious sound of Matthew's truck skidding to a stop. He jumped out of the car and rushed after them, ignoring the officer's warnings to wait for backup. The forest was a maze of shadows and sounds. Laura's panicked breathing echoed in Matthew's ears, fueling his determination. He pushed forward, catching glimpses of movement ahead until he finally spotted them. "Laura," he roared, his voice a mixture of rage and pain. She froze for a moment, her face as pale as a ghost. Before she could react, Matthew had grabbed Ethan, and they both fell to the ground. The struggle was fierce and relentless. Ethan struck back with calculated precision, but Matthew's anger made him unstoppable. They rolled across the forest floor, fists flying, each blow carrying the weight of betrayal. Despair gripped Ethan. From his belt he pulled a knife, its blade gleaming in the split moonlight. Without hesitation, he plunged it into Matthew's side. Matthew gasped, pain ripping through his body as he writhed to the ground, blood soaking his shirt. Laura screamed, but her scream was drowned out by the rumbling footsteps of the approaching officers. Ethan turned to run, knife in hand, but the police were ready. "Drop your weapons," one of them shouted, aiming his rifle at him. Ethan ignored the order and took another step toward the trees. The officers opened fire. Shots rang out, and Ethan's body jerked violently before it fell into the dirt. He lay still, his lifeless eyes staring up at the canopy above. The forest was silent, save for Laura's sobs and Matthew's labored breathing. The officers rushed to Matthew, pressing on his wound as paramedics were called. Laura, paralyzed with fear and grief, was handcuffed and led out of the forest. Matthew was rushed to the hospital, his condition critical but stable. When he came and went, he thought about Samantha, her laughter, her dreams, a life stolen by betrayal and tragedy. He vowed to heal if he could only see justice. Laura's trial was swift and unforgiving. The evidence against her, combined with her flight from the scene, left no room for doubt. She was convicted of manslaughter and escape, receiving a sentence of 25 years without parole. As Matthew sat in the courtroom, watching the judge deliver the verdict, he felt a hollow sense of closure. Ethan was dead, Laura was incarcerated, and Samantha was gone forever. The price of his revenge was high, but the weight of their actions had shattered everyone involved. The Johnson house, once a symbol of family and stability, was now a relic of the past, a home haunted by loss and betrayal. For Matthew, life would never be the same. And yet, in his heart, he burned with hope that one day he would be able to find peace amidst the rubble.